My name's Samuel Carter, and I've lived my whole life in a small town on the dusty edge of Texas. Folks here know me as the quiet kind, the man who fixes fences for his neighbors, mows his own lawn even when his knees ache, and never has much to say unless there's something worth saying. I was never rich, never powerful, never the type to turn heads when I walked into a room. But I worked honest, raised my only daughter right, and believed that kindness was the currency that never lost value. My wife, Margaret, passed away 5 years before this story began. After she left, my daughter Emily became the only light in my house. She was my pride, my heart, and my comfort. She'd gone to college in Dallas and was doing well for herself, smart, confident, and full of dreams bigger than our little town could hold. When she called me one evening to say she'd met someone special, I remember feeling that quiet mix of joy and fear every parent feels. You want your children to find love, but you hope the person they find truly sees them, not just what they can get from them. The young man's name was Ethan Reynolds. She said he worked in finance, some big company in the city. She told me he was charming, confident, and well-spoken. "You'll love him, Dad," she said, her voice dancing with excitement. I wanted to. God knows I did. The first time Ethan came down to visit, I stood outside the house, wiping the dust off my hands with an old rag. My house isn't fancy, small, one-story, white paint chipping around the porch, but it's home. I built most of it myself, board by board, back when my back was strong. Ethan pulled up in a shiny black car that looked like it belonged more in a city showroom than on our cracked dirt road. He stepped out wearing a suit so clean it almost looked afraid of dust. His smile was sharp, his handshake even sharper. "Mr. Carter," he said, glancing at my old boots and faded overalls. "It's good to finally meet you. Emily's told me so much." I could see the politeness in his tone, but also the quiet judgment in his eyes. The kind that measured people by what they owned, not who they were. Still, I smiled. "Welcome, son. Hope you don't mind the place, it's a bit old-fashioned." He chuckled, glancing around. "It's quaint. Reminds me of one of those retro movie sets." Emily shot him a look, the kind a woman gives when she wants her man to hush. I pretended not to notice. Dinner was simple: fried chicken, cornbread, mashed potatoes. Margaret's old recipes. Ethan picked at his food carefully, like he wasn't sure it was safe to eat. He kept checking his phone between bites, talking about things like equity, portfolios, and leverage. I didn't understand half of it, but I nodded anyway. When Emily left to bring dessert, Ethan leaned back in his chair, looked around my small dining room, and said, "You know, Mr. Carter, you could probably sell this property for a decent amount. Move into the city, closer to Emily and me. Wouldn't that be easier?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But some things you don't sell, son. You just take care of them." He didn't respond, just smiled, that polite, hollow kind of smile that told me he thought I was stuck in the past. That night, after they left for the city, I sat on the porch under the old oak tree, listening to the crickets hum. The stars were clear, the air cool. I remember whispering to myself, "Lord, keep my girl safe. And let her see the truth when the time's right." Months passed. They got married in a big ceremony, white tents, fancy catering, photographers everywhere. I wore my best suit, the same one I wore at my wedding 40 years ago. Ethan looked at me once that day, shook my hand for the cameras, then drifted toward his friends in tailored suits and loud laughter. He had everything polished about him, but not a trace of humility. At first, I kept quiet. I didn't want to burden Emily with my worries. She sounded happy when she called, though her calls came less often. She was living in a big apartment now, busy with Ethan's work parties, business trips, and social dinners. Then one winter evening, she came home for a weekend alone. She looked tired, not just from work, but from life. "Dad," she said quietly, "Ethan says you should think about selling the house. He says it's time you live somewhere better." I smiled softly. Better doesn't always mean newer, honey. Some things are better because they've stood the test of time.
She looked down.
He just thinks it would be nice to have you closer. I nodded, though deep down, I knew what it really meant. Ethan didn't understand people like me. People who find value in simplicity. He thought I was poor because I lived quietly. But I was rich in peace, in memories, in things no man can buy. I didn't argue. I just said, "Tell Ethan I'll think about it."
And I did.
I thought long and hard, about how pride blinds a man, how arrogance builds its own downfall.
But I didn't plan revenge.
I didn't have to. Because life has a way of teaching lessons to those who laugh at humility. And soon enough, Ethan would learn that lesson the hard way. The following months rolled on like slow-moving clouds across a wide Texas sky. I kept busy with the little things, fixing the fence that leaned after every storm, tending to Margaret's old rose bushes, and visiting the small hardware store in town where folks still called me Sam instead of Mr. Carter. Life was quiet, predictable, and peaceful. That's the kind of wealth I understood. Emily and Ethan visited now and then. Mostly for holidays or birthdays. Each visit told me a little more about the man my daughter had married, and a little more about the kind of life she was living. Ethan liked to talk. He talked about his office, his promotions, his new car, the market, and things I couldn't pretend to understand. He wore watches that cost more than my truck and shoes that never saw dust. He didn't mean to insult me, not directly. But every word carried a quiet weight of superiority. The way he'd pat my shoulder after a sentence, as if talking to a child. The way he'd smile when I didn't understand one of his fancy terms. One Sunday afternoon, he walked through my house, hands in his pockets, looking around like a man inspecting a museum. "You ever think about renovating this place, Sam?" he asked.
Renovating?
I repeated, leaning on my cane.
What for?
It does just fine as it is.
He chuckled.
I mean, look at these walls. You could open up the space, add modern lighting, maybe a new kitchen. It'd increase the property value. I smiled faintly. Son, I built that kitchen with my own hands. Value's already there for me. He nodded politely, but his eyes said, "You just don't get it, old man." Emily stood nearby, her hands clasped, watching the exchange. She loved her husband, anyone could see that, but she also saw what I saw, the widening gap between simplicity and pride. Later that evening, as they prepared to drive back to Dallas, Ethan put his hand on my shoulder again. "You know, Sam," he said, "if you ever need money, don't hesitate to ask. We're doing pretty well. I'd be happy to help." His tone wasn't cruel. It was just careless, like charity wrapped in pride. I looked him in the eye and said quietly, "Thank you, son. But I've got all I need." He smiled that same polite smile.
Of course. And off they went. Weeks passed.
Emily's calls became shorter. She sounded distracted, sometimes hurried. She talked about how busy Ethan was, how the city never slept, how she was thinking about finding a job herself. I could hear something in her voice, a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work, but from pretending everything's fine. I tried to keep my heart steady. She had to find her own way, just like I once did. Then one Friday evening, she called again. This time, her voice had a brightness I hadn't heard in a while. "Dad, Ethan got promoted. He's now a senior associate. They're moving into a bigger apartment. Isn't that great?" I smiled, though I knew what that meant. Longer hours, bigger debts, and deeper pride. "That's good, honey," I said. "Tell him congratulations from me." She laughed. "I will. He's already planning a celebration." That celebration came the following weekend. They invited me, though I knew I didn't quite fit in with the kind of crowd they had. Still, for my daughter, I went. Their new apartment was high up in one of those glass towers that made you feel like the world below didn't exist. Everything was sleek, shiny, and expensive. Even the air smelled like something bottled and sold at a premium. Emily greeted me with a hug, her eyes lighting up like they used to when she was little. But her clothes, her words, even her laughter felt practiced. Like she was trying to keep up with a rhythm that wasn't her own. Ethan came over, holding a glass of champagne.
"Sam,
"You made it," he said, smiling wide. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." I nodded, following him into a room full of laughter and chatter. People in suits, heels, and perfect smiles. The kind of people who talked about numbers more than names. "This is my father-in-law," Ethan said proudly, though his tone had a hint of mockery.
he's from down south.
"Owns a place out in the countryside, real old-fashioned charm."
Someone chuckled. "Oh, that's lovely."
"Like one of those farmhouses you see in movies."
Ethan smirked.
"Yeah, something like that. Though, I don't think he's into modern stuff. He still uses cash for everything." The room laughed softly. I smiled too. Not because it was funny, but because I'd learned that silence protects your dignity better than pride ever will. Later that night, while everyone danced and drank, I stood by the balcony. The city lights stretched far and wide, beautiful yes but hollow in their own way. Ethan came up beside me, sipping his drink. "Not bad, huh?" he said, nodding toward the skyline. "Hard work pays off." I looked at him, then out at the view.
"It does," I said.
"But peace pays better." He frowned a little, maybe not understanding, maybe not wanting to. "You and your sayings, Sam. You should write a book."
I smiled.
"Maybe I already have. Just never put it on paper."
Time moved on. A year passed.
Ethan's career kept climbing. Emily, though, started visiting alone more often. She'd come down for weekends, saying Ethan was too busy or had to travel. I didn't ask questions. I just made her tea, fixed her favorite biscuits, and let her sit on the porch where silence did the talking for us. One afternoon, she sat there quietly, staring at the fields. "Dad," she said softly, "do you ever feel like you don't belong in someone else's world?" I turned my head.
"You mean Ethan's?"
She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes," I said, "you marry someone because you think you're walking toward the same horizon.
But people change their pace.
Some start running ahead, thinking they're going somewhere faster. But often, they just lose sight of where they began." Tears welled in her eyes.
"He's not a bad man, Dad. He's just proud.
"He wants to be someone important."
I nodded.
"Nothing wrong with wanting more. Trouble begins when you forget to be grateful for what you already have."
She squeezed my hand.
"You always make things sound so simple." I smiled gently. "That's because they are." Months later, I heard from one of Emily's old friends that Ethan had started investing heavily. Real estate, crypto, stocks, things I barely understood. Apparently, he was making good money and living large. Emily mentioned he'd started his own firm with some partners.
I congratulated her. But deep down, I worried.
Not because I didn't believe in success, but because I'd seen what happens when pride climbs faster than wisdom. And sure enough, small cracks began to show.
Emily called less.
When she did, her voice trembled under the surface. "Dad, things are just stressful right now. The business is growing fast. Ethan's under pressure. He barely sleeps."
I told her, "Pressure's fine, honey.
Just make sure it doesn't turn into pride."
She didn't respond.
Just said she'd call me next week. That next call never came.
Weeks turned into months.
Then one night, well past midnight, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was shaky, half-broken. "Dad, can I come home?" I sat up in bed.
"Of course, sweetheart. What happened?" "It's Ethan," she whispered.
"Something went wrong with his business. He lost almost everything." My heart sank, not from anger or satisfaction, but from a deep sadness I'd seen coming like a slow train you can't stop.
"Come home," I said softly.
"There's always room here." She arrived the next morning, pale and quiet. Ethan didn't come with her. She said he was too ashamed.
Too angry. Too lost.
I didn't ask for details. She just needed peace, and this home still had plenty to give. As I watched her rest that night, I whispered to myself, sometimes, God humbles the proud not to destroy them, but to remind them what matters. And though I didn't know it then, life was just beginning to teach Ethan that very lesson, the one he once laughed at, standing in my old farmhouse, calling it quaint. He was about to learn what simplicity truly meant, and how sometimes, the man you mock for having little ends up being the one who still has everything. When Emily came home that morning, she looked like a ghost of the woman she once was. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice so weak it trembled with every word. She'd brought just one suitcase, and the sound of its wheels on my old wooden floor was the kind of sound that tears a father's heart open. "Where's Ethan?" I asked gently, after she'd had a warm meal and sat wrapped in a blanket by the fire. She shook her head slowly.
"He's still in Dallas.
He said he needs to fix things before facing anyone. He's not himself, Dad." I nodded quietly. "He'll come when he's ready." She looked up, guilt shining in her eyes.
"You were right, Dad. He was chasing too much, too fast."
I tried to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. He said I didn't understand ambition. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the fire crackle. "There's nothing wrong with ambition, sweetheart. It's just that when pride holds the reins, it's bound to run wild." Tears rolled down her cheeks. He kept saying money would solve everything. That once he made enough, we'd finally be happy. I smiled faintly, though my heart ached.
Money can buy comfort, but not peace.
And happiness isn't something you buy, it's something you live with. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I just wanted him to see you the way I do, Dad. To see that peace isn't weakness." I patted her hand softly.
"He'll see it, honey."
Life has a way of opening eyes that once refused to see. The days turned into weeks. Emily stayed home, helping around the house, cooking, sitting out on the porch in the evenings with a cup of tea just like her mother used to.
For a while, she found quiet again.
I could see the tension in her face begin to fade, though her heart still carried worry for Ethan.
He didn't call. Not once.
But I knew pride sometimes builds walls higher than pain. Then, one morning, as I was trimming the hedge, a car pulled up on the dusty road outside. It was black, the same one I'd seen years ago when Ethan first came to meet me. Only this time, it wasn't polished. Dust covered the sides, and the shine was gone. Ethan stepped out, but he wasn't the same man I remembered. His suit was wrinkled, his hair messy, and his eyes, once full of certainty, were tired, hollow. He stood there for a moment, just staring at the house. The same house he once called quaint. I set down my shears and said quietly, "Morning, son." He nodded, voice low. "Morning, Sam." He hesitated before walking closer.
"Is
Emily here?"
"She is," I said. "Come on in."
When he stepped inside, it was like watching a man walking through his own reflection. Every photo, every piece of wood, every quiet space reminded him of something he'd dismissed before. Emily came out from the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly when she saw him.
"Ethan," she whispered. He swallowed hard.
"I came to talk." She nodded, and they went to the porch. I stayed inside, giving them space, though I could hear fragments of their conversation through the window. "I lost it all, Em," he said quietly. "The business collapsed. The partners bailed. The investors pulled out. Everything's gone." Her voice broke. "Oh, Ethan." "I tried to fix it. I thought I could turn it around. I worked day and night, I just needed more time. But the money ran out, and the debts didn't." There was silence for a moment, then her soft reply, "Why didn't you tell me?" He laughed bitterly. "Because I couldn't stand looking weak in front of you.
Or your father. Especially him." She sighed.
"He never judged you, Ethan." He looked toward the yard where I was sitting quietly, pretending to read the newspaper. Maybe not with words.
But he didn't have to.
His silence said more than anything I ever could. He was right, I hadn't judged him. But he had mistaken my peace for judgment, my quiet for superiority. Pride does that to a man. That evening, Ethan stayed for dinner. It was the first time we'd all sat together in years without pretense or distance. The air was heavy at first, awkward, filled with unspoken truths. But food has a way of softening hearts. As we ate, Ethan finally looked up at me. "Sam, I owe you an apology."
I set my fork down. "For what, son?" He took a deep breath.
"For looking down on you. For thinking that money made me better. I used to laugh at this place, at the way you lived. I thought you were stuck in the past. But now I realize, maybe you were the one who saw the future clearer than I did." I smiled softly.
"We all learn, Ethan.
Sometimes it just takes a little falling to remember where the ground is."
He nodded, eyes moist.
"I thought I had everything figured out. But the truth is I was just running, chasing numbers, chasing approval, chasing something I didn't even understand. I thought success meant being above others. Turns out, it just meant being alone." Emily reached across the table, touching his hand gently.
"We can start again, Ethan.
Maybe smaller, simpler, but real." He looked at her, his eyes full of regret. "If you'll still have me." She smiled faintly. "You're my husband. I'll always have you." I excused myself from the table then, giving them the space they needed. As I walked out into the yard, the sky was turning orange, and the air smelled of rain. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for teaching him gently." Ethan stayed with us for a few days. He helped me around the property, something I never imagined he'd do. We fixed the old barn roof together, painted the fence, even replaced the porch steps that had creaked for years. He wasn't the same man anymore. He didn't check his phone every minute. He didn't talk about business or money. Instead, he asked questions about the land, about the tools, about life in a small town. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch drinking coffee, he said, "You know, Sam, I never understood why you stayed here all these years. But now I get it. Out here, everything feels real.
The world slows down.
You can actually breathe."
I smiled. "That's the thing about peace, son.
You can't buy it, but once you find it, you realize it's the only thing worth keeping." He nodded, staring out at the fields. "When I was making money, I thought I was winning. But it felt like running uphill forever. Now I don't have anything, and somehow I feel lighter." I chuckled softly. Sometimes losing is the only way to stop running. Still, reality has a way of creeping back in. After a couple of weeks, Ethan said he had to go back to the city to sort things out, see what could be saved, maybe find work. Emily wanted to stay a bit longer, and he agreed. He promised he'd come back soon.
But months passed, and he didn't.
He called Emily a few times, always saying he was trying to rebuild, to make things right. I could hear in his voice that he was still fighting, not against others this time, but against himself. Then one afternoon, a letter came in the mail.
It was from Ethan.
The handwriting was shaky, uneven. He wrote that he'd found a small accounting job at a local firm. Nothing fancy, just steady work. He said he was living in a modest apartment now, cooking for himself, walking to work. He ended the letter with words that stayed with me for a long time. "I used to think simplicity was failure, Sam. But now I see, it's freedom. I mocked it because I feared it. Thank you for never hating me, even when I didn't deserve your respect." When Emily read the letter, tears filled her eyes. "He's changing, Dad."
I nodded. "No, honey.
He's remembering who he was supposed to be." Over the next year, things began to heal. Slowly but truly. Ethan and Emily started over, not with luxury, but with honesty. He visited more often, helped fix the roof, painted the barn again, and even started tending the vegetable garden with me. He'd kneel down, hands in the dirt, and laugh softly. "Never thought I'd enjoy this, Sam. There's something peaceful about watching things grow.
I grinned.
That's because life's the same way. You can't rush it.
You plant, you water, and you wait.
And in time, it gives back. But life still had one more lesson waiting for Ethan, one final test of humility. It came when an old friend from his business days reached out. A man named Richard, who'd once been Ethan's partner before things fell apart. Richard had started a new firm, smaller, steadier, and offered Ethan a chance to join again. He said he respected how Ethan had handled the failure and wanted him on board. Ethan came to me that evening, restless. "Sam, I don't know what to do. Richard's offering me a good position. The pay's not huge, but it's enough. It's a real chance to rebuild."
But I looked at him.
"But you're afraid of falling into the same trap again?"
He nodded. "Yeah.
"I don't want to become that man again. The one who mocked, who chased, who forgot."
I leaned forward, my voice calm. "Then don't."
"Success doesn't change a man, it just shows who he already was."
"You've changed, Ethan."
"So success will look different this time." He thought for a long while, then nodded slowly. "You really believe that?"
"I do," I said.
"Because humility doesn't fear success, it just remembers the cost of pride."
Ethan took the job.
He worked quietly, honestly, and never once bragged about it. He and Emily moved into a small house near town. Nothing fancy, but full of laughter. He'd still visit often, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk. One day, as the sun set and the cicadas started their evening song, he turned to me and said, "You know, Sam, when I first came here years ago, I thought this porch was just old wood and chipped paint. But now, it feels like peace itself sits here."
I smiled.
"That's because peace doesn't live in walls or paint, son. It lives in people." He nodded, looking at me with genuine respect, the kind that can't be faked. And in that moment, I knew the lesson had finally settled deep inside him. Life had done what I never could. It had humbled him, not to punish him, but to make him whole. I still remember the year everything began to change, not all at once, but like the slow bending of a tree in the wind. Life has a way of shifting things around when you least expect it.
It started one summer morning.
The heat was dry and heavy, and the air smelled of dust and corn. I was sitting on my porch, oiling my old tools, when Emma's car pulled up. She stepped out looking worried. I hadn't seen her that pale since she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. "Dad," she said softly, "Michael lost his job." I set the oil rag down and looked up.
"Everything all right?"
She nodded, though her eyes were glistening.
"He'll be fine.
The company downsized. It wasn't his fault." I didn't say much. Life storms come and go, and I knew this was one he'd have to face himself. But inside, a quiet thought rose like a whisper. Now, let's see how life talks to him.
For weeks, Michael stayed home.
Emma told me he was sending out resumes, calling friends, even trying to contact his old boss. But pride is a funny thing. The same pride that once made him mock my simplicity was now keeping him from taking smaller jobs. "I won't go back to doing just anything," I overheard him telling Emma one day when I stopped by. "I'm worth more than that." He didn't see me standing in the doorway. I turned and left without saying a word. The irony didn't escape me. The man who once called me old-fashioned was now sitting jobless in his modern house, refusing to work with his hands. Meanwhile, I kept busy. My days were simple but full. I still fixed fences, sold firewood, helped the neighbors with their gardens. Sometimes I earned a little money, sometimes not much. But at night, I slept easy. That's the difference between a man who values work and a man who values status.
A few months passed.
One day, Emma called again, her voice trembling. "Dad, can we come stay with you for a while? Just until Michael finds something new." My house was small, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that smelled like cedar, but I didn't hesitate.
"Of course, honey.
You're always welcome here." When they arrived, I noticed something I hadn't before. the silence between them. Emma looked tired, and Michael looked hollow. The confident shine in his eyes was gone. He shook my hand softly and said, "Thank you for letting us stay, sir." That was the first time he ever called me sir. They stayed in the spare room. I didn't pry into their troubles.
But I watched.
Michael woke late, often spent the day staring at his phone, scrolling endlessly. Every now and then, he'd step outside, looking over the fields as if the horizon might hand him a solution. Then one morning, I found him sitting on the porch steps, holding a cup of coffee, eyes red and tired. He said quietly, "I didn't know it could all disappear so fast."
I nodded.
"It usually does, when we think it never will." He looked at me, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. There was no arrogance in his eyes anymore. Just weariness and something deeper, humility. A few days later, I was out repairing the fence on the west side of the property. The old boards had given way, and the cows were starting to test their limits. Michael came out, hands in his pockets.
"You need a hand?" he asked.
I handed him a hammer.
"If you're offering."
He hesitated, then rolled up his sleeves. The sun was sharp that day, the kind that makes sweat trickle down your back before noon. We worked quietly for a while, the sound of nails and wood filling the silence. After an hour or so, he leaned on the post and said, "I used to think this kind of work was beneath me." I smiled faintly.
"And now?"
He looked down, then met my eyes.
"Now it feels honest."
That was the first real step. Over the next few weeks, Michael started helping around more. Chopping wood, fixing leaks, even taking odd jobs in town. At first, I thought it was just to pass the time. But I soon realized something had shifted inside him. He wasn't doing it for pride anymore. He was doing it for peace. One evening, after supper, we sat outside watching the sky fade from orange to purple. The crickets had just started singing. Michael broke the silence. "I used to think success was about what you owned," he said softly.
"The car, the house, the job title."
"But it's strange, when all that's gone, you start realizing what really matters." I said nothing. Sometimes silence carries the strongest agreement. He continued, "You were right all along, Mr. Carter. I used to make fun of how simple you lived. But I get it now. Simplicity isn't weakness.
It's freedom."
Hearing those words, I won't lie, they hit deep. Not because I wanted to be right, but because life had finally taught him what I never could. A month later, he got a job offer from a local mechanic shop. Nothing fancy, nothing like the corporate title he once had.
But he took it.
The first morning he went to work, I stood at the porch and watched him drive off in his dusty old truck. The same man, but quieter, humbler. There was pride in his eyes again, but a different kind, the kind that comes from effort, not ego. When he came home that evening, he smiled and said, "It feels good to be tired from real work." I just nodded, feeling that familiar warmth in my chest. Emma later told me how he'd started saving money, helping with chores, spending more time at home. Their laughter returned, the lightness that had been missing for months. Sometimes, she'd catch me watching them and ask, "Dad, did you ever think things would turn out like this?" I'd just smile. Life always finds a way to balance itself. Because that's the truth. I never lifted a finger to teach Michael a lesson. I didn't argue, didn't scold, didn't gloat. I just let life do what it does best, humble us when we forget where we came from. There was one evening, though, that I'll never forget. Michael came out to the porch with 2 beers. He handed me one, then sat beside me, silent for a while. Finally he said, "I used to think you were small-minded, that your world was too simple. But I see now, you were the only one who really understood how to live." I took a slow sip and said, "Son, life's biggest lessons don't come from books or money. They come when everything else is stripped away, and you're left with yourself." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'm sorry for how I treated you." I looked out toward the fading sunset and said softly, "Don't be sorry, Michael. You just took the long road to wisdom." He smiled, and for the first time, I saw peace on his face. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat on the porch alone for a long while. The moon hung low, silver light spilling over the fields. I thought about how strange life is, how it never needs our permission to teach someone a lesson. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't need to. The truth is, time is the greatest teacher and the gentlest avenger. All I did was stand still long enough for him to see what he'd been running from, the quiet dignity of a simple, honest life. And that, I suppose, was my revenge. Not one of bitterness, but of balance. Because sometimes, you don't have to make anyone pay. You just have to let life show them what you already knew. And that's exactly what it did. It's strange how time softens everything: anger, disappointment, even pride. Months had passed since Michael started working at the mechanic's shop, and the rhythm of our lives had found its balance again. The house was peaceful now, filled with the quiet sounds of routine. Coffee brewing in the morning, Emma humming while folding laundry, Michael coming home with grease on his hands and a calm on his face. Sometimes I'd watch him from the porch when he pulled into the driveway. He'd get out of the truck, shoulders relaxed, that same man who once refused to lift a hand to fix a fence now carrying a box of tools like it was something sacred. He'd nod at me, saying, "Evening, sir," before heading inside to kiss Emma and sit down for dinner. That was our life, simple, honest, content. But the biggest changes don't happen outside. They happen quietly inside a man's heart. One Sunday morning, after breakfast, Michael asked if he could talk. We sat out back under the big oak tree, the same one Emma used to swing from as a kid. He looked thoughtful, rubbing his hands together before speaking. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how I used to live, how I treated people, even you." I stayed quiet, letting him speak his truth. I thought I was better than everyone, because I wore a suit, because I worked in an office. I thought money made me smarter. But now, he looked up at the branches swaying above us. Now I see how blind I was. He paused, then continued softly, "The guys I work with now, they don't have fancy degrees. Some barely finished school. But they're good men. They show up. They help each other. And they sleep well at night. That's worth more than any job title." I smiled faintly. "You sound like a man who's finally learned what living means." He chuckled. "I guess I have. Took me long enough, huh?" "Some lessons need time," I said. "You can't rush humility. It has to come when pride gets tired." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind through the leaves. Then Michael said something I never expected. "I've been saving up. I want to start something small, my own garage maybe. A place where I can hire folks, treat them right. Not like the company that let me go." There it was, not ambition out of ego, but purpose born from experience. "That sounds good," I said quietly. "If you build it with your hands and your heart, it'll last." He looked at me and smiled. "You really believe that?" "I do," I said. "Because you've already rebuilt the hardest thing, yourself." A few weeks later, Michael started fixing cars out of my old barn. Word spread fast in our small Texas town. Folks respected honest work, and Michael's reputation grew, not for his skills alone, but for his kindness. He never overcharged anyone. He'd stay late to finish a job for a single mom who needed her car for work. He'd drive miles just to help an old neighbor whose truck broke down on the road. Sometimes I'd walk by the barn in the evenings and hear him humming while working, the same kind of contentment I'd known all my life. It made me smile. Life had taken him apart, only to put him back together, stronger and gentler than before. Emma was happier too. I could see it in the way she laughed now, not out of relief, but out of peace. One evening she said, "Dad, thank you for letting us stay. You've changed him more than anything could have." I shook my head. "Not me, sweetheart. Life did that. I just gave it space." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Still, I think you were the example he needed."
Maybe.
But I never wanted to take credit for something life orchestrated so perfectly. A few months later, something happened that brought everything full circle. The company that had fired Michael reached out. His old boss called, offering him a position again. Higher pay, more authority. When Emma told me, I watched Michael's expression closely. There was no excitement on his face, just quiet thought. That evening, he came to me again. "They want me back," he said. "Same office, same people."
I waited.
"And what do you want?"
He sighed. "I don't know."
It's tempting, the money, the title. But, he looked around at the barn, the fields, the house that smelled of cedar and simplicity. This place gave me back something that job never could, peace. I smiled, proud of the man he'd become. "Then you already know your answer."
He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do."
He called his old boss the next day and turned down the offer. I overheard him say, "I appreciate it, sir, but I've found where I belong." When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "I guess some lessons stick for life." That night, the three of us sat down for dinner. Emma's roast chicken, mashed potatoes and cornbread. The kind of meal that fills both the stomach and the soul. Halfway through, Michael raised his glass. "To second chances," he said. "And to learning from the man who never said, 'I told you so.'"
I chuckled.
"Life says it for me." We laughed together, the kind of laughter that heals the last pieces of pride still lingering in the air. Years passed, and Michael's little garage turned into a real business. He hired locals, taught young boys how to fix engines, even started sponsoring high school kids who wanted to learn the trade. He never forgot where he came from, or how far he'd fallen before he rose again. People in town started calling him, the man who builds with heart. And every time someone asked where he learned his work ethic, he'd point at me and say, "From my father-in-law, the wisest man I know." I'd laugh and wave him off. But deep inside, I felt something warm, not pride exactly. More like quiet gratitude. Because I hadn't taken revenge. I hadn't tried to prove myself right. I had simply trusted that life would show him what arrogance never lets us see.
And it did.
One evening, long after sunset, Michael and I were sitting on the porch again. The crickets were out, the world calm and kind. He said softly, "You know, sir, I used to think you were just lucky, to be so peaceful. But now I realize peace isn't luck.
It's a choice."
I nodded slowly. "That's right, son. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, nail by nail, like that barn of yours." He smiled, staring out at the dark horizon. "I think I finally understand what you meant when you said, 'Life balances itself.'"
"Good," I said.
"Because it always does." As time went on, I grew older, slower, quieter. But one thing remained the same, the way Michael looked at me, not as the simple man he once mocked, but as someone who'd shown him the map back to himself. And that's when I realized something. I hadn't lost anything when he mocked me years ago.
He had.
All I did was wait for him to find it again. If I could leave one lesson behind for anyone listening, it would be this. You don't always have to fight for respect. Sometimes, you just have to live in a way that time itself defends you. Because pride may shine for a while, but humility lasts forever. And the sweetest revenge of all isn't revenge at all, it's peace. The years rolled on, gentle as the wind over the Texas plains. Seasons came and went, each one softer than the last. My hair grew thin and silver, and my hands, once strong and steady, began to tremble a little when I worked with them.
But my heart, that stayed calm.
Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I'd sit on my porch and watch Michael closing up the garage down the road. The sun would paint the sky orange and gold, and I'd see him laughing with his workers, wiping the sweat off his brow, his face full of that quiet satisfaction that only honest work can give. He had become everything I hoped he'd learn to be, not rich, not powerful, but content. And in that contentment, he found a kind of wealth no man could ever take away. One evening, he came over after work. He brought Emma and the kids, two little ones with the same spark in their eyes that she had when she was young. We all sat outside, the children chasing fireflies, their laughter echoing across the field. Emma leaned on her mother's old chair, the same one she used to rock in as a girl, while Michael sat beside me, handing me a glass of sweet tea. He looked around and said, "It's funny how simple things end up meaning the most."
I smiled. Funny? No, son.
That's how it's always been. We just forget until life reminds us.
He nodded thoughtfully.
I used to think you were too quiet. That maybe you didn't care what people said or thought.
I chuckled.
Oh, I cared. I just didn't let it change who I was. He leaned back and let out a deep breath. I wish I'd learned that sooner.
You did, I said softly.
You just took the road that taught it the hard way. Sometimes, that's the only road that sticks. The sky darkened slowly, the horizon melting into deep blue. The children came to sit by us, tired but happy, their hands full of fireflies glowing like little lanterns. Emma smiled at them, then looked at me. "Dad, you've always been so patient with life. Weren't you ever angry? Not even back when things went wrong."
I thought for a moment.
"Anger's easy," I said finally. "It burns fast, but it burns you too. I learned early on that peace takes more strength than rage. And in the end, peace lasts longer."
Michael nodded. You're right.
I wasted years chasing success that didn't mean anything. All it gave me was noise. You lived quiet, and somehow ended up richer than all of us. I laughed softly. Richness isn't about what you own, Michael. It's about what you don't need anymore. That night, after they left, I sat alone under the stars, thinking about all that had passed. I remembered the man Michael used to be, proud, restless, looking down at the life I lived. And I thought about the man he'd become, humble, kind, grateful. Life had done its work well. You see, I never wanted to punish him. I never wanted him to hurt. I just wanted him to see what I saw, that dignity doesn't come from money or power, but from how you carry yourself when no one's watching. And in the end, he saw it. Not through my words, but through his own fall and rise. That's the kind of justice I believe in. Not the loud, angry kind.
The quiet kind.
The kind that doesn't need revenge, because truth itself takes care of that. A few years later, on my 75th birthday, Michael stood up during dinner to make a toast. He raised his glass and said, "To the man who taught me that silence can speak louder than pride, and that peace is the only victory that matters." Everyone clapped, but I just smiled and lowered my head. Because in that moment, I realized something simple: I didn't need anything else from life. I had watched pride turn to humility, distance turn to respect, and misunderstanding turn into love. And I had done it without raising my voice, without seeking revenge, without demanding an apology. Life had done the talking for me. Now, some nights, I sit on that same porch and watch the lights from Michael's garage glowing in the distance. I hear faint laughter, the sound of engines, the hum of life moving on.
And I smile.
Because once upon a time, that same man mocked my simplicity.
And now, he lives by it.
That to me is the gentlest kind of revenge, not to see someone suffer, but to see them grow into the very thing they once misunderstood. It's a strange sort of justice, one that doesn't destroy, but redeems. So if you ever find yourself wronged by someone, mocked, belittled, underestimated, remember this. You don't have to fight every battle. You don't have to shout or prove your worth to those who can't see it yet. Just keep living with quiet dignity. Keep walking straight while others stumble in circles. Because life has a way of humbling pride and rewarding patience. One day, those who laughed at you will look back and understand. And when that day comes, you won't need to say a thing. You'll just smile, knowing you never lowered yourself to their level, and somehow, life raised them up to yours. Sometimes silence really is the best revenge. Because it lets the truth speak louder than you ever could. And in the end, it always does.